Welcome to Sinister Truths. Wherever in the world you're watching from, take a moment, look around you, and ask yourself this: what if a single place held a secret so strange, so twisted, that even history struggles to explain it? Today, we're diving into a mystery from 1835 in Alexandria, one that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the past. Are you ready to uncover a story so bizarre you won't believe it actually happened? Then stay with me, because what comes next will haunt your mind long after this video ends. The year was 1835, and Alexandria was a city of contrasts. To an outsider, it appeared as a bustling port town, vibrant with trade and prosperity, where ships from distant lands docked daily, bringing goods, ideas, and sometimes trouble. The sun would rise over the Alexandria harbor and cast its golden glow upon the river's surface, glittering like scattered jewels. Merchants unloaded crates of spices, textiles, and exotic commodities, shouting over the calls of dock workers, their voices competing with the creaking of rigging and the slap of water against the hulls. There was an energy here that pulsed with life, ambition, and the promise of wealth. But beneath this veneer of commerce and civility, the city had secrets, dark, twisted, and deeply buried. Secrets that even the wealthiest merchants and most powerful officials would rather not speak of. At first glance, Alexandria seemed orderly. Its streets were lined with elegant brick buildings, balconies adorned with wrought iron railings, and shops that gleamed with freshly polished windows. The aroma of freshly baked bread mingled with the scent of the river, creating a deceptive sense of normalcy. Children ran through the narrow lanes, their laughter mingling with the distant clatter of horse-drawn carriages. Women in fine dresses walked with poise, their parasols shielding them from the midday sun, while men in crisp waistcoats discussed deals and politics, with a seriousness that suggested power and importance. Yet, as is often the case with cities steeped in history, the surface was merely a mask. The real Alexandria, the one most residents avoided speaking about, existed in shadows, behind closed doors, and beneath the very streets people walked upon. Slavery was a deeply entrenched reality in Alexandria at this time. The wealth of the city's elite was built upon the backs of those who had no freedom, no voice, and no recourse. The market was a place of transactions that went beyond the exchange of goods. Human lives were bought and sold, as casually as a sack of grain or a barrel of sugar. Slaves labored in the opulent mansions of the rich, worked in the docks unloading cargo under the scorching sun, and were tasked with menial chores that, if neglected, could earn them severe punishment. Their stories, their sufferings, and their quiet acts of defiance were largely invisible to the city's outwardly proud citizens. Yet those whispers, those hushed conversatio, in alleys, behind shutters, and in the dark corners of taverns, hinted at an undercurrent of unrest, mystery, and something far more sinister than the ordinary cruelty of the times. The geography of Alexandria itself seemed to hold secrets. The city stretched along the river, its docks bustling with commerce during the day but eerily silent at night. Narrow alleyways snaked between the larger streets, twisting unpredictably, as if designed to confuse outsiders and protect clandestine activities. Some of these alleys led to courtyards that were hidden from the main thoroughfares, where lanterns flickered behind heavy curtains, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Whispers of illegal dealings, forbidden gatherings, and unexplained occurrences circulated among the lower classes. Merchants would warn one another discreetly to mind the shadows, and slaves would tell tales of voices echoing from empty warehouses or footsteps in abandoned streets when no one else was around. One of the most peculiar aspects of Alexandria was the stark division between the public and private worlds. On the surface, society operated with rules, etiquette, and an illusion of fairness. The wealthy attended lavish dinners, donned expensive silks, and hosted balls that lasted long into the night. Their laughter rang out across the marble halls, masking the uneasy knowledge that much of their comfort depended on the labor and suffering of others. Meanwhile, in the private spaces, the hidden chambers, the servants' quarters, and the abandoned warehouses, the city told a different story. Here, deals were struck that would never see the light of day, and secrets were exchanged in whispers, nods, and coded gestures. A sense of fear and anticipation permeated these spaces. Something lurked beneath the veneer of order, waiting to be discovered, though no one could predict what form it might take. For newcomers, Alexandria could be both mesmerizing and unsettling. Its architecture, while stately and grand, often bore the marks of time, neglect, and decay in subtle ways. Cracked walls, sagging roofs, and darkened doorways hinted at hidden histories and untold stories. Travelers spoke of strange encounters, fleeting shadows in alleyways, unfamiliar faces appearing suddenly at windows, or distant sounds that seemed impossible to identify. Locals would dismiss these tales with polite smiles, attributing them to imagination or superstition, but some could not ignore the sense that the city itself was alive, watching, and keeping its secrets close. The social hierarchy in Alexandria only heightened the tension. Wealthy merchants, government officials, and prominent families held immense influence, their power reinforced by wealth, connections, and, in many cases, fear. They occupied the grandest homes along the riverfront, complete with private docks, lavish gardens, and guarded entrances. In contrast, artisans, dock workers, and enslaved individuals lived in cramped quarters that were easily overlooked by those in power. It was in these margins, the spaces between grandeur and squalor, that the most intriguing and mysterious stories seemed to emerge. Rumors suggested that the city's elite were not always as civilized or honorable as they appeared. Whispers of secret societies, hidden dealings, and forbidden rituals hinted at a layer of Alexandria most would never see or speak about openly. Even the river that ran alongside Alexandria seemed to hold an aura of mystery. By day, it reflected the sun in sparkling patterns, carrying the rhythm of commerce along its waters. By night, however, the river took on a darker character. The current seemed to whisper secrets to those who listened closely, and some claimed to see strange lights flickering along its banks where no lamps had been lit. Boats would appear and disappear at odd hours, some carrying legitimate cargo, others seemingly transporting goods or people that would vanish without explanation. Tales of drowned men, missing slaves, and unexplained disappearances became part of the city's whispered lore, stories that were rarely recorded but passed from one cautious mouth to another. Alexandria's marketplaces also played a role in its mysterious atmosphere. By day they were full of color, noise, and energy. Merchants hawked their wares, buyers haggled fiercely, and the aroma of spices, fruits, and freshly baked bread filled the air. Yet some areas of the markets were different, quiet, shadowed, and seemingly avoided by the majority. Locals would speak in hushed tones about hidden stalls where illicit goods were traded, where forbidden knowledge changed hands, and where alliances were quietly formed or broken. The market was not just a place of commerce, it was a stage upon which the city's hidden dramas quietly unfolded, often invisible to those who only glanced at the surface. It was in this intricate web of streets, docks, and secret corners that the story of 1835 would begin. Alexandria was a city of appearances, yet appearances were always deceiving. For every cheerful child running through a sunlit alley, for every elegant lady walking beneath the shadows of her balcony, there were countless others who carried burdens unseen and stories untold. The city seemed to breathe in contradictions, prosperity and decay, freedom and oppression, light and shadow, all coexisting in uneasy balance. And within this tension, the seeds of a bizarre, almost incomprehensible mystery were already planted, waiting for the right moment, the right person, or the right incident to bring them to the surface. No one at the time could have predicted what would unfold. The city, with all its energy and wealth, had a history, a character, and a rhythm all its own. It was a place where every corner held the possibility of discovery, where each shadow could hide both danger and revelation. Alexandria was alive, not merely as a backdrop for human activity, but as a silent witness to secrets Hat would challenge beliefs, frighten the curious, and haunt the city for years to come. Every stone in the streets, every creaking beam in the warehouses, and every flickering lantern along the riverfront seemed to whisper, "Something is coming. Pay attention." And so, as the sun set over Alexandria in 1835, casting long shadows over the streets and docks, the city seemed to hold its breath. Its secrets lay dormant, concealed in plain sight, ready to emerge. There was a feeling in the air, a tension, almost electric, that something strange was about to break the city's fragile equilibrium. The ordinary rhythms of daily life continued. Merchants bargained, children laughed, and slaves labored quietly. Yet beneath it all, an undercurrent of anticipation ran like a hidden river. Something was stirring, something that would soon pull the city into a story so bizarre, so inexplicable that even history would struggle to fully comprehend it. Little did anyone know the first strange incident, The one that would ignite a chain of events leading to one of Alexandria's most baffling mysteries, was about to occur. And when it did, the city's facade of order and normalcy would begin to crumble, revealing a web of secrets, shadows, and human behavior far darker and more twisted than anyone could have imagined. The morning after the city had settled into its usual rhythm, a peculiar unease lingered in the air. The streets of Alexandria were alive with their familiar hum of activity. Merchants calling out their wares, the clatter of hooves against cobblestones, the laughter of children chasing each other down narrow alleys. But beneath it all was a subtle tension, as though the city itself sensed that something unusual had taken root. No one could pinpoint exactly what had changed, yet a sense of anticipation hovered over the docks and the marketplaces, whispering through the cracks of every brick building and alleyway. Something had emerged, something that would shatter the fragile balance between what was seen and what was hidden, and it began not with a person, but with an object so strange and inexplicable that even the most imaginative of residents found themselves questioning their senses. It was on the river's edge, just beyond the eastern docks, where the first glimpse of the anomaly appeared. A small crowd had begun to gather, their curiosity fueled by the rumors that traveled faster than the morning wind. A fisherman, his skin tanned and weathered from years spent on the water, was the first to notice it. At first he thought it was debris, a crate, a bundle of rope, perhaps a barrel that had broken free from a passing ship. But as he approached, the object's peculiar shape and unfamiliar markings began to unsettle him. It seemed almost alive in its stillness, as if it were aware of the observer, silently inviting inspection yet daring anyone to touch it. The fisherman called out to nearby dock workers who hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. Before venturing closer, the more the crowd gathered, the more the story spread. By the time the first official inquiry arrived, whispers had grown into full-blown speculation. What was it? Who had brought it here? Why had it appeared at this specific location? The object was unlike anything anyone in Alexandria had seen before. It bore symbols that were unfamiliar, etched deep into its surface with a precision that suggested careful intent. Its material seemed neither entirely natural nor completely manufactured, as though it existed somewhere between worlds, defying explanation. Even those accustomed to the constant flux of the docks, merchants, sailors, and laborers, could not make sense of it. Some swore it radiated a subtle heat. Others claimed they felt a faint vibration in the air around it, almost imperceptible but undeniably present. Authorities arrived cautiously, their presence signaling both concern and skepticism. Men of influence, dressed in formal coats and waistcoats, examined the object with magnifying glasses and notebooks, attempting to catalog its features, measure its dimensions, and determine its origin. They consulted with scholars, sailors, and anyone who might have seen something similar, but no satisfactory explanation emerged. Each expert, despite their education and experience, could only shrug or offer theories that only deepened the mystery. The object seemed deliberately enigmatic, resisting categorization and comprehension, and the more people observed it, the more unsettled they became. As the day wore on, the crowd grew, and with it came an undercurrent of fear. Alexandria's residents were accustomed to whispers and rumors, but this incident ignited something stronger, a blend of fascination and dread. Mothers clutched their children closer, and merchants whispered hurriedly about the implications, worried that this anomaly might somehow disrupt the city's fragile order. Even the slaves, who typically went unnoticed in the larger narrative of the city, stared with wide eyes and hushed curiosity, sensing that this was not merely an ordinary occurrence. The object had a pull, a silent demand for attention, and all who encountered it felt, however subtly, that it might be connected to forces beyond their understanding. No one wanted to be the first to touch it, yet everyone wanted to get closer, to glimpse some secret that might explain its presence. A bold young apprentice, his curiosity outweighing his fear, stepped forward, reaching for the object only to recoil when a strange sound emanated from it. A low hum, almost musical, but tinged with a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the bones. The crowd gasped, stepping back instinctively, while the authorities quickly cordoned off the area. Their caution did little to dampen the murmurs, and soon stories began to circulate, each more fantastical than the last. Some claimed the object had appeared in the dead of night, drifting silently along the river until it lodged itself at the eastern docks. Others suggested that it was a gift, or a curse, from some distant land, imbued with powers no one could comprehend. As word spread, individuals with particular knowledge or skill were drawn to the scene. An old scholar, whose years studying ancient texts had made him skeptical of the supernatural, inspected the markings carefully. He muttered to himself in low tones, flipping through volumes of reference with increasing agitation. His brow furrowed deeper with each passing minute, until finally he leaned back and shook his head, admitting aloud what no one wanted to hear. He had never seen anything like this before. If a scholar could not interpret it, then perhaps it was meant to remain beyond human understanding. The realization sent a ripple through the crowd, amplifying both fear and fascination. But it was not just the city's learned men who reacted to the discovery. The dock workers, accustomed to seeing cargo from distant lands, noted peculiarities that others overlooked. The object did not resemble any crate, barrel, or merchandise ever transported along the river. Its texture was unlike wood, metal, or stone, and it seemed resistant to touch. When struck lightly with a mallet, it produced a sound that was neither hollow nor solid, but something in between, almost like the echo of a bell submerged underwater. Every detail, from its odd weight to its subtle glow in the afternoon sun, suggested that it was far from ordinary. Some of the more superstitious onlookers began to whisper about curses, omens, and the interference of forces best left unmentioned. By mid-afternoon, the curiosity had transformed into obsession. The object became the focal point of Alexandria, drawing attention from all corners of the city. Journalists, who had only recently begun chronicling local events, jotted furiously in their notebooks, attempting to capture every detail. Merchants paused their trade, distracted by the enigma, while scholars debated its origins in heated arguments that drew no conclusion. Each theory seemed to give rise to a dozen new questions, and soon it became evident that the object was more than a simple anomaly. It was a catalyst for confusion, speculation, and perhaps even fear. Nightfall did little to calm the situation. Lanterns were lit along the docks, casting flickering shadows across the crowd that remained, unwilling or unable to leave. Those who stayed reported hearing strange noises, faint whispers carried by the wind, a rustling sound that seemed to come from the object itself, and even the occasional scream from someone who claimed to see something moving within it. Skeptics dismissed these claims, attributing them to imagination and exhaustion, yet the effect was undeniable. Fear had begun to take root, mixing with fascination, and the city of Alexandria, so accustomed to the ordinary, was now consumed by the extraordinary. The authorities attempted to investigate further, enlisting workers to move the object to a secure location, but resistance was met at every turn. The object, they discovered, was heavier than anticipated and oddly balanced, defying conventional methods of transport. Several men who tried to lift it reported feeling dizzy, faint, or otherwise unwell, as though the object emitted a subtle influence that affected them physically and mentally. Scholars speculated about magnetic fields, chemical reactions, or some natural phenomenon that could account for these sensations. But none of their hypotheses satisfied all the observations. It was as if the object had been designed to resist human understanding, to remain an enigma no matter how closely examined. Rumors grew wilder with each passing hour. One story told of a man who had attempted to peer inside the object and claimed he glimpsed visions of places he had never seen, yet simultaneously felt transported to times he had never lived through. Another claimed that the object whispered secrets in a language he did not understand, but somehow he comprehended perfectly. Skepticism battled belief, and the city became divided between those who saw it as a divine sign, those who feared it as a curse, and those who insisted it was a hoax. Alexandria, a city built on trade, power, and rationality, found itself suspended in a state of collective awe and uncertainty. Even as the sun rose the next day, painting the river with gold and crimson hues, the object refused to relinquish its secrets. Its presence was magnetic, drawing more people with each hour. Some came seeking knowledge, others driven by fear, and some merely curious to witness what had become the talk of the city. The docks, once a place of ordinary labor, were now a stage for Alexandria's collective imagination, a theater of suspense and speculation. Every glance, every whispered conversation, and every hurried step in the alleys leading to the waterfront was infused with tension. The city had become a living entity, attentive and responsive, its citizens united by fascination and dread, bound together by a mystery that none could yet solve. It was during this time that subtle patterns began to emerge, Observers noted changes in the object's appearance depending on the angle of sunlight, the intensity of the wind, and even the time of day. Some claimed it seemed to respond to human emotion, growing warmer when anger or fear was present, cooling when calm prevailed. The more it was examined, the more inscrutable it became. Alexandria's residents, from the highest-ranking merchants to the lowliest laborers, found themselves ensnared by its influence. Conversations no longer revolved around ordinary matters. Instead, speculation about the object consumed every interaction. Markets buzzed with conjecture, taverns echoed with theory, and families debated its nature behind closed doors. By the third day, the object had not only captivated Alexandria but had begun to shape the city's behavior. People avoided sea-retained streets, moved cautiously along the docks and altered their routines. Fear was tempered by fascination, and fascination by obsession. Those who had dismissed it as a minor curiosity now understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would, in ways not yet fully realized, transform the city itself. Even skeptics who had once scoffed at the tales now approached cautiously, driven by an irresistible desire to see, to know, to understand. And yet, for all the attention, all the speculation, and all the attempts at explanation, the object remained a mystery. Its origins were unknown, its purpose inscrutable, and its power undeniable. Alexandria had stumbled upon something beyond ordinary understanding, and in doing so had awakened a chain of events that would draw the city deeper into secrecy, fear, and ultimately revelation. The stage was set. The city, its people, and the object were now inextricably linked, bound together by curiosity, dread, and the promise of a story so bizarre that it would be remembered for generations. Little did anyone know, this discovery was only the beginning. Hidden agendas, strange occurrences, and the lives of those who would encounter the object were about to intertwine in ways that no one could have anticipated. Alexandria, already a city of secrets, was about to reveal some of its deepest and most disturbing truths, and the first ripple in what would become a tidal wave of mystery had just begun. The city, in its bustling normalcy, had already changed forever, and no one would emerge from this episode unchanged. The discovery of the strange object had already begun to weave its influence through Alexandria, but as the days passed, it became clear that the city itself was only one actor in this unfolding drama. More important were the people who would surround it, those whose choices, curiosities, and secrets would determine the course of the mystery. Among them were figures from all walks of life, drawn together by circumstance, coincidence, and an invisible thread of fate, each carrying their own ambitions, fears, and shadows. It was as if the object, in its silent enigma, had called out to these individuals specifically, knowing that only their presence could bring the story fully to life. First among these was Elias Thornwell, a wealthy merchant whose influence stretched across Alexandria like the shadows of the grand warehouses that lined the riverfront. Thornwell was a man of imposing presence, tall and broad, with a face carved in sharp angles that seemed to read the world as both a ledger and a battlefield. He had earned his fortune through commerce, shrewd investments, and, according to whispered rumors, dealings best left unexamined. His mansion overlooked the river, its walls lined with the spoils of trade, silk from the Orient, spices from the Indies, and ivory and rare artifacts that spoke of distant lands. Thornwell's reputation was impeccable on the surface, yet those who knew him spoke of a man who valued secrecy as much as wealth, who would not hesitate to use fear and manipulation to achieve his ends. The appearance of the object intrigued him, not merely for its mystery, but for the potential it represented. To Elias Thornwell, nothing was purely dangerous or harmless. It was a matter of how it could be wielded, controlled, or leveraged for advantage. In contrast, there was Miriam Voss, a young scholar whose intellect and curiosity were matched only by her determination to uncover the truth. She had arrived in Alexandria from a distant city to study ancient texts and artifacts, drawn by rumors of Alexandria's hidden history and the arcane knowledge said to linger in its libraries. Miriam was of average height, with hair the color of midnight and eyes that seemed to miss nothing, constantly observing and cataloging details the rest of the world overlooked. Where Thornwell saw opportunity, Miriam saw questions, layers upon layers of them, each demanding careful consideration. She approached the object with meticulous attention, sketching its markings, measuring its dimensions, and noting its subtle peculiarities. Her excitement was tempered by caution, for she had encountered many anomalies in her studies, yet few that elicited the same combination of fascination and dread. She could sense, almost instinctively, that the object was a catalyst, not merely for curiosity, but for events that could upend lives and challenge everything Alexandria's citizens believed about their world. Then there was Samuel Crow, a dock worker whose life had been defined by labor, routine, and the quiet, simmering resentment that came from living in a city so dependent on the work of men like him. Crow was broad-shouldered, with hands calloused from years of hoisting cargo and long days under the harsh sun, yet his mind was sharper than most gave credit for. He had witnessed the city's hidden underside, the dealings of merchants, the oppression of slaves, the coded communication of those who lived in the margins. Crow approached the object with a mixture of fear and pragmatism. He did not care for riches or knowledge, he sought only understanding, a sense of safety, and a hope that this strange presence would not disrupt the fragile existence he had carved out along the docks. Yet as he observed its peculiarities, a part of him could not ignore the unnerving suggestion that this object was no ordinary anomaly, and that somehow it had the power to reach beyond itself and touch the lives of all who encountered it. Among these key figures, there was also Reverend Alaric Byrne, a man whose piety and devotion were both a comfort and a source of tension within the city. Byrne was lean and austere, his face lined with the gravity of a life spent mediating between moral ideals and human frailty. He had witnessed the city's inequalities firsthand, preaching to congregations that spanned the wealthy and the destitute alike, always careful to balance compassion with authority. Yet the appearance of the object challenged even his understanding of providence and the natural order. He felt a pull toward it that was both moral and spiritual, an internal conflict between faith, curiosity, and fear. Byrne's presence would become crucial, for he represented a moral lens through which the events surrounding the object could be examined, and his interpretations, influenced by both conscience and superstition, would shape the perceptions of many within Alexandria. These individuals were joined by others whose roles, though initially peripheral, would prove equally significant. A young apprentice from Thornwell's household, curious yet cautious, began sketching the object's symbols and taking notes under Miriam's guidance. Dockworkers who had witnessed Crow's approach whispered about the object's behavior, sharing observations that often conflicted yet collectively added layers to the enigma. Servants, whose lives were bound by duty and fear, became unlikely observers, noting minute changes in the object's appearance or behavior that escaped the notice of more prominent figures. Even children, with their unfiltered perception of the world, provided insights that adults dismissed but which later proved essential to understanding certain patterns. What connected these people was not merely the object itself, but the web of human motives, curiosity, and fear that began to entangle them. Thornwell's ambition and desire for control collided with Miriam's pursuit of knowledge. Crow's pragmatism often put him at odds with Byrne's moral considerations. Yet despite these conflicts, all were drawn into a shared orbit, unable to escape the gravitational pull of the object. It became clear that the mystery would not be solved by a single individual alone, but through a complex interplay of perspectives, each contributing to the unfolding narrative in ways both conscious and unconscious. The relationships among these figures began to evolve rapidly. Thornwell, ever cautious and strategic, sought to manipulate the curiosity of others to his advantage, offering information selectively while concealing his true intentions. Miriam, skeptical of hidden motives, carefully documented interactions and inconsistencies, creating her own mental map of the people around the object. Crow observed silently, weighing alliances, testing trust, and noting which individuals could be counted on in moments of crisis. Reverend Byrne oscillated between caution and intervention, offering guidance that was at once ethical and politically motivated, aware that his interpretations might influence the city's perception of the unfolding events. Each interaction added a new dimension to the story, layering suspense upon intrigue, until the city itself seemed to participate in the drama, as though Alexandria had become a living stage for human behavior intertwined with the mystery of the object. Yet these were not mere ordinary people encountering an anomaly. Each bore personal histories, secrets, and ambitions that added depth and unpredictability to the story. Thornwell's dealings in distant lands had exposed him to mysteries and dangers few could imagine, making him both resourceful and wary. Miriam's rigorous academic training had taught her to question everything, yet the object defied the conventions of logic she had relied upon. Crow's life had instilled in him resilience, observation, and a quiet determination that proved invaluable when confronting the inexplicable. Burns' faith, while steadfast, also left him vulnerable to doubt and the fear that his understanding of morality could be challenged by forces beyond human comprehension. These individual complexities ensured that the narrative surrounding the object would be shaped not only by its nature but by the intricate interplay of human character. As days passed, the city began to notice the interactions themselves. Observers remarked on the subtle tensions that ran through gatherings at the docks, the quiet arguments in the margins of taverns, and the careful calculations that informed each action around the object. Alexandria, already a city steeped in secrecy, had become a theater not just for mystery, but for human psychology and behavior. Every glance, every hesitation, every whispered word carried significance. The object was no longer simply an enigma. It had become a mirror, reflecting the ambitions, fears, and desires of those who dared to approach it. Rumors about the people involved spread almost as quickly as those about the object. Thornwell was seen as cunning and potentially dangerous, capable of exploiting the situation for personal gain. Miriam was lauded for her intellect yet whispered about as someone who might go too far in pursuit of understanding. Crow's pragmatism and keen observation earned respect, but also suspicion among those who underestimated him. Burns' moral authority made him both a stabilizing influence and a potential instigator of conflict, as his interpretations could rally the populace or provoke dissent. The city watched, fascinated and fearful, as these individuals navigated a mystery that none could control entirely. It became evident that the object had catalyzed more than curiosity. It had exposed the core of Alexandria's social dynamics. The wealthy, the learned, the laborers, and the clergy were all drawn into a delicate dance of observation, manipulation, and alliance, each step influenced by both the object and by one another. Secrets long hidden in the shadows of the city were subtly revealed through interactions, motives, and the choices made in the object's presence. What began as a simple curiosity had become a crucible in which human behavior was tested, and where the boundaries between trust, ambition, fear, and morality were blurred. By the end of the week, it was clear that the people were as much a part of the mystery as the object eye. The city of Alexandria had discovered that enigmas are rarely solitary. They are intertwined with the lives and choices of those who engage with them. Thornwell, Miriam, Crow, Byrne, and countless others had become unwitting participants in a drama that would escalate in ways none could foresee. Their interactions, motivations, and secrets set the stage for the next phase of the story, a phase in which hidden agendas, unexpected alliances, and the consequences of curiosity would begin to emerge in dramatic and sometimes terrifying ways. In Alexandria, 1835, the object had shifted from being an anomaly to becoming the axis upon which human behavior and mystery revolved. Every glance, every step, every decision surrounding it carried weight. Each person involved had a role to play, whether they realized it or not. The city itself seemed to lean in, watching, waiting, as though anticipating the revelations, conflicts, and transformations yet to come. And in the hearts and minds of those drawn to the object, questions began to stir. Who could be trusted? What forces were truly at work? And how far would each go in pursuit of knowledge, control, or survival? The object had awakened more than curiosity. It had awakened the city, and through it, the people who would confront, manipulate, and ultimately be shaped by the mystery that had arrived unbidden at Alexandria's docks. And as the sun dipped behind the eastern horizon, casting long shadows across the river and the narrow streets, the city, its inhabitants, and the object itself seemed poised on the edge of a revelation that would forever alter the course of history, revealing truths that were long hidden, yet impossible to ignore. The days following the discovery of the object became a delicate balancing act of observation, experimentation, and cautious investigation. Alexandria itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if every building, alley, and lantern-lit dock held its breath in quiet expectation. The citizens had already begun to recognize that the object was more than a mere curiosity. It was a puzzle, a riddle that defied logic, demanding scrutiny from anyone willing, or brave, enough to look deeper. And among those most drawn to its presence, Elias Thornwell, Miriam Voss, Samuel Crow, and Reverend Alaric Byrne, each began their own painstaking methods of exploration, driven by ambition, intellect, practicality, and morality, respectively. Miriam, ever the meticulous scholar, took the lead in cataloging every minute detail of the object. She sketched its markings repeatedly, noticing subtle variations that seemed to shift with the angle of the sun. Each symbol, etched deep into the object's surface, hinted at a language unknown to her, yet some aspects suggested a structured pattern rather than random artistry. She compared the markings to ancient texts she had studied, tracing possible connections to lost languages, forgotten rituals, and esoteric symbols. The more she examined, the more the complexity of the object became apparent. It was as if it had been designed to resist understanding, to challenge the observer to look beyond mere surface appearances. The city, by extension, became her laboratory. Every encounter, every reaction of those around the object, was part of a living, breathing experiment in human response to the unknown. Thornwell, on the other hand, approached the object with a strategist's eye. He observed how the people reacted to it, noting who was bold enough to approach, who hesitated, and who appeared to be quietly documenting details. To him, the object represented power, control over knowledge, influence, and perhaps even fear. He instructed his servants to subtly test its properties, attempting to move it, touch it in controlled ways, and gauge its reactions. Each experiment, conducted with precision, revealed nothing conclusive, yet Thornwell interpreted the object's subtle responses as a sign of potential manipulation. The more the others speculated, the more he realized that influence over the narrative could be just as valuable as understanding the object itself. Crow, grounded in pragmatism, focused on the physical reality of the object. He had witnessed too many strange occurrences along the docks to dismiss the oddities surrounding it, and his approach was methodical in its simplicity. He tested its weight, its stability, and its reactions to environmental changes, the wind, the tide, the touch of hands both gloved and bare. He recorded every anomaly, every tremor, every faint hum that emanated from it. To Crow, it was vital to understand the object's tangible effects first before theorizing on more abstract possibilities. Yet even he could not ignore the subtle influence it seemed to exert on those around it, the nervous glance, the quickened heartbeat, the inexplicable hesitation that struck even the most confident individuals. Reverend Burns' approach was distinct from the rest. He sought signs of moral or spiritual significance, watching for patterns in human behavior as much as in the object itself. Was it a test, a warning, or perhaps a temptation designed to reveal the inner nature of those who approached it? He documented not only the object's physical properties, but the emotional and psychological responses it provoked. His sermons and counsel began to reflect his observations, weaving subtle warnings into his words, cautioning the city against being seduced by the allure of the unknown. He believed that understanding the object's moral implications was just as critical as understanding its form or origin, and he often clashed with Miriam's analytical rigor and Thornwell's manipulative strategy over how best to engage with it. In the midst of these individual efforts, the city itself became a canvas for the mystery. The docks were littered with makeshift notebooks, sketches, and charts as people recorded details obsessively. Lanterns illuminated corners of the object that seemed to shift and reveal new facets only under certain lighting conditions. Conversations in taverns and marketplaces were dominated by speculation. What had been dismissed as rumor became increasingly intertwined with observation. People began noticing patterns, small sequences in the symbols, reactions that seemed to correlate with specific times of day, or subtle shifts in the object's temperature that were too precise to be coincidence. The more the citizens observed, the more convinced they became that the object was not passive. It interacted with its environment in ways that were deliberate, almost sentient, and each clue, no matter how minor, was a piece of a larger puzzle that no one yet fully grasped. One evening, as the fading sun cast long shadows across the river, Miriam and Crow worked together to test a theory. She had noted that the markings seemed to align differently depending on the angle of observation. Crow suggested placing mirrors at strategic points around the object to see if the reflections might reveal hidden patterns or additional markings. The experiment required careful coordination, a team to hold the mirrors, precise timing with the setting sun, and acute observation. When the light hit the object at the perfect angle, they witnessed a subtle but undeniable shift. Faint lines and additional symbols appeared that had been invisible under normal light, confirming that the object's surface was dynamic, not static. Miriam's excitement was palpable, yet tempered by a growing sense of unease. Each revelation seemed to confirm the object's complexity, but also hinted at forces beyond human comprehension. Forces that would require not just intelligence or observation but intuition, and perhaps even courage to fully understand. Meanwhile, Thornwell had begun manipulating the narrative of the discovery. He ensured that select pieces of information reached certain individuals while being withheld from others. He encouraged speculation, subtly nudging the city's attention towards certain interpretations that aligned with his interests. His maneuvers were effective. Scholars debated, laborers whispered, and clergy considered moral implications, all while Thornwell observed from the shadows, calculating advantage. Yet the more he tried to control the situation, the more the object resisted easy understanding, its elusive properties thwarting every attempt to dominate it. The more it revealed, the more it concealed, creating an intricate dance of discovery and frustration that ensnared everyone who approached. Byrne, observing these human dynamics, noted with concern the growing tensions and subtle manipulations among the key figures. He saw ambition, curiosity, and fear intertwining in ways that could lead to conflict, misjudgment, or even disaster. He took it upon himself to document these interactions as meticulously as he did the object's physical traits, noting who was trustworthy, who was susceptible to persuasion, and who might act rashly under pressure. His insight into human behavior, combined with his understanding of moral consequence, offered a different layer of clarity that complemented, yet often conflicted with, Miriam's analytical methods and Thornwell's strategic planning. As the investigation deepened, it became evident that the object's mysteries extended beyond its immediate physical and visual properties. Crow noted that certain environmental conditions, a shift in the river's current, a particular alignment of the sun, even changes in wind direction, appeared to trigger subtle reactions in the object, small vibrations or pulses of heat that suggested it was connected to more than its immediate surroundings. Miriam cataloged these occurrences meticulously, creating charts and diagrams to detect patterns, while Thornwell speculated on potential leverage, and Byrne considered the ethical ramifications of any interaction. Each day yielded fragments of knowledge, yet no one could assemble the entire picture, and every new clue seemed to deepen the enigma rather than simplify it. The city, too, began to react to the unfolding investigation. Taverns were filled with debates over the object's significance, marketplaces became venues for speculative discussion, and ordinary citizens felt the thrill and tension of witnessing a mystery that refused to yield answers. Even those who had initially dismissed the anomaly found themselves drawn in, compelled by a combination of fear and curiosity. The object, once a singular point of fascination, had become a focal lens through which Alexandria's society examined itself, its ambitions, its fears, and its vulnerabilities laid bare by the lure of discovery. Yet for all the meticulous observation, experimentation, and theorizing, the most striking aspect of the unraveling clues was their elusiveness. Patterns emerged only to shift, responses were inconsistent, and every hypothesis had its limits. Miriam realized that the object was not merely a puzzle to be solved. It was an interactive enigma, engaging with observers in ways that suggested a form of awareness or purpose beyond human comprehension. Thornwell saw in this a challenge to his ambitions, yet also an opportunity to harness its influence strategically. Crow, increasingly wary, acknowledged that the object's effects might extend beyond immediate observation, subtly altering perception, behavior, and judgment. Byrne, balancing faith and reason, pondered whether the object was a test or revelation, designed to expose the hidden inclinations of those who approached it. As the days turned into weeks, a sense of inevitability began to permeate Alexandria. The city, the object, and the people drawn to it were now entwined in a narrative that could not be escaped. Every observation, every experiment, every whispered theory added layers to the story, creating a web of intrigue that grew more intricate and more dangerous with each passing moment. The clues, fragmentary, were converging toward a larger truth, one that promised revelation, confrontation, and transformation, not only for those directly involved but for the city as a whole. In this delicate balance of curiosity, fear, and human ambition, it became clear that the unraveling of the mystery would require more than intellect, courage, or strategy alone. The clues were deliberate, their meaning partially concealed and partially revealed, demanding an interplay of perception, intuition, and moral consideration. Alexandria had entered a state of suspended reality, where the ordinary rhythms of daily life existed alongside the extraordinary, and the city's inhabitants were participants in a drama that would test not only their minds, but their very understanding of reality itself. And so, as night fell over the docks, the object continued to hum softly, a quiet pulse against the rhythm of the river. The city, already transformed by the presence of the Enigma, now stood at the threshold of deeper revelations. The people involved, Thornwell, Miriam, Crow, Byrne, and the countless others who had become unwitting participants, were poised on the edge of discovery. Each clue they uncovered was a step closer to understanding, yet also a reminder of how much remained hidden. The city waited, the object pulsed, and the story continued, drawing everyone into a labyrinth of questions, suspicions, and possibilities that promised to change Alexandria forever. As Alexandria adjusted to the presence of the strange object and the painstaking investigations surrounding it, a subtle shift began to ripple through the city, barely perceptible at first, but increasingly impossible to ignore. The initial curiosity and cautious observation that had dominated the first days gave way to unease, then tension, and soon escalated into fear. The object, which had inspired intrigue and collaborative study, began to reveal a far darker influence. Shadows lengthened not only across the cobblestone streets, but also within the hearts and minds of those who interacted with it, drawing out impulses and secrets that had long been hidden. The first dark turns came quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet their consequences would prove profound. It began with subtle disagreements, initially trivial, among the city's observers. Thornwell, ever strategic, began to grow impatient with Miriam's meticulous investigations. He argued that the object should be controlled, moved, and studied under his direction, rather than subjected to endless theoretical analysis. Miriam resisted, insisting that understanding came first, control second, and that the object's potential dangers required careful consideration. The tension between the two escalated, spilling into public spaces and whispered conversations among onlookers. Crow, ever pragmatic, attempted to mediate, but even he found that his efforts were hampered by the growing distrust and ambition surrounding the object. Reverend Byrne observed these conflicts with mounting concern, noting that human ego, ambition, and fear were beginning to entangle the investigation more deeply than any physical clue could. Soon, the effects of the object extended beyond arguments and rivalry. A laborer, previously dependable and respected for his level-headedness, began to exhibit uncharacteristic behavior. He became irritable, withdrawn, and increasingly paranoid, convinced that others were plotting against him to gain favor with the mysterious entity that had become the center of Alexandria's focus. Similar disturbances appeared elsewhere. Merchants abandoned their routines, children became unusually silent or fearful, and even scholars reported nightmares, a sense of being watched, or moments of inexplicable agitation while near the object. Though initially dismissed as coincidence, the accumulation of these incidents suggested a pattern, an invisible influence emanating from the object, subtle yet undeniable, nudging the city and its inhabitants toward disorder. Thornwell, recognizing the psychological impact the object exerted, began to manipulate the situation more deliberately. He orchestrated small deceptions, planting false clues and selectively revealing observations to gain advantage over Miriam and Crow. He implied that the object had responded to his touch in ways it had not responded to theirs, claiming insight into its intentions that seemed to sway less skeptical onlookers. These actions introduced a layer of moral ambiguity and mistrust among the observers, amplifying the tension. The city, once unified in curiosity, now became a network of competing agendas, suspicion, and subtle power plays, all influenced, consciously or unconsciously, by the enigmatic object. Meanwhile, Miriam's once methodical approach began to falter under the weight of uncertainty and mounting pressure. The object's complexity, combined with Thornwell's manipulations and the increasing unease among onlookers, led her to moments of doubt, hesitation, and frustration. She documented every anomaly, yet the more she uncovered, the less she felt in control. The object's patterns seemed to shift unexpectedly, defying the logic she had relied upon. Observations that appeared conclusive one day would be contradicted the next, leaving her questioning her own perception. Even Crow, pragmatic as he was, began to notice subtle influences affecting his judgment, moments of impulsiveness, fleeting irritations, and an unsettling compulsion to act in ways he could not fully rationalize. The object had begun to touch minds as well as eyes. Reverend Byrne, ever mindful of morality and consequence, became increasingly vocal in his warnings. He spoke of temptation, pride, and human weakness, cautioning that the object seemed designed to expose hidden faults, fears, and desires. Some dismissed his words as excessive or overly spiritual, yet there were undeniable signs of moral strain, small betrayals among observers, fake misinterpretation of evidence for personal gain, and conflicts that escalated beyond rational explanation. The city itself seemed to respond, as if the object's presence had awakened a latent tension that had always existed beneath the surface, now amplified and given shape. The first overtly dark turn occurred when an experiment went catastrophically wrong. Miriam had devised a method to test the object's reaction to temperature changes, attempting to observe patterns by applying controlled heat and cold. A small group assisted, including Crow and a few apprentices, as Thornwell watched with an inscrutable expression. Initially, the procedure seemed harmless. Instruments measured minute shifts in heat, and observers documented subtle reactions. But then the object responded unpredictably. A sudden pulse of warmth surged through the room, accompanied by an almost inaudible hum that reverberated in the bones of those present. Papers flew, glassware shattered, and several individuals were thrown to the ground by a force they could not explain. Panic ensued, observers screamed and scrambled for safety, and the object remained, unnervingly unscathed, as if it had been waiting for the moment to assert its presence. The aftermath of the incident rippled through Alexandria. News of the sudden disturbance spread, inflating fear and speculation. Some claimed that the object had retaliated against meddling. Others suggested it had been testing the observers, revealing their unpreparedness and weaknesses. Crow, usually calm, admitted privately to Miriam that he had felt a compulsion, an internal urge to act impulsively during the experiment, and he wondered if others had experienced the same. Thornwell, on the other hand, appeared undeterred, perhaps even invigorated, seeing an opportunity to leverage the fear and confusion to increase his influence. Reverend Byrne, deeply shaken, warned that the city itself had been morally tested, and that the object's true power lay not in its material form, but in its ability to manipulate the human spirit. Rumors of additional, subtle effects began to circulate. People who had observed the object from a distance reported feelings of nausea, dizziness, or sudden anxiety. Some claimed to hear whispers carried on the wind, voices that seemed to speak directly to them in their own thoughts, revealing fears, desires, or regrets. Children, particularly sensitive to the unusual, spoke of shadows moving independently, or figures appearing briefly in reflective surfaces. It became clear that the object's influence was no longer limited to those who touched or studied it. It extended into the perceptions and emotions of the city at large. Alexandria, a city previously defined by commerce, hierarchy, and daily routine, now operated under an invisible pressure, as though the very air had thickened with tension and apprehension. The object also began to affect relationships among key figures in more profound ways. Thornwell. Manipulations grew increasingly audacious. He spread misinformation subtly, fostering mistrust between Miriam and Crow. He suggested that certain observations had been misinterpreted intentionally, sowing seeds of suspicion that destabilized their collaboration. Miriam, who had previously relied on Crow's pragmatic input, now questioned his judgment, wondering if his conclusions had been swayed by unseen forces or personal bias. Crow, in turn, noticed Miriam's increasing anxiety and began to doubt his own instincts, creating a feedback loop of uncertainty and tension. Reverend Byrne observed these deteriorating dynamics with a mixture of concern and resignation, recognizing that the object's influence extended beyond physical phenomena into the moral and psychological fabric of those around it. The dark turns extended beyond interpersonal conflict. Unexplained events began to occur in the surrounding area, fires that started without ignition sources, animals behaving erratically, and shadows moving in ways that defied natural laws. Even the city's infrastructure seemed subtly affected. The river's current shifted unexpectedly, the docks creaked and groaned, with no apparent cause, and lanterns flickered despite a lack of wind. Citizens reported strange dreams, fleeting visions and sensations of being watched. The object, once an isolated anomaly, had become a focal point for disturbances that permeated the very environment of Alexandria. Its presence transformed the ordinary into the uncanny, forcing the city's inhabitants to confront realities that blurred the line between rational understanding and fear. One particularly alarming development occurred when a minor theft spiraled into a tense confrontation. a young apprentice previously tasked with assisting Miriam, had disappeared briefly near the object. When discovered, he was found muttering incoherently about lights, voices, and movements no one else could see. Crow and Thornwell confronted him, and in the ensuing argument, accusations flew, tempers flared, and near violence erupted. Reverend Byrne intervened, his voice trembling as he admonished all parties to exercise restraint and recognize the moral consequences of their actions. This incident illustrated a growing pattern. Proximity to the object seemed to amplify hidden emotions, desires, and impulses, creating conditions ripe for conflict and error. The situation reached a critical point when reports emerged of individuals being physically affected in ways that defied explanation. Several people who had approached the object too closely experienced sudden fainting, involuntary spasms, or brief blackouts. Others reported disorientation, as though time had shifted or elongated while they were near it. Miriam, Thornwell, and Crow each conducted careful observations, attempting to discern triggers or patterns, but the object resisted categorization. Each event raised the stakes, reinforcing the notion that the mystery was not merely intellectual, it was visceral, capable of affecting body, mind, and perhaps even spirit. In the midst of these escalating events, a broader realization began to settle over Alexandria. The object's presence was no longer a contained anomaly. It was a catalyst, amplifying the hidden tensions, ambitions, and fears of all who interacted with it. The city itself seemed to respond to these influences, creating an atmosphere of perpetual unease. Ordinary routines were disrupted, alliances were tested, and the moral fabric of the city was strained. Citizens whispered of curses, divine tests, and hidden powers, while scholars, laborers, and clergy alike began to understand that the object's significance extended far beyond its material form. It had become a mirror, reflecting the darkest impulses of human behavior and the vulnerabilities of the city itself. By the time the third week passed, Alexandria had entered a state of sustained tension. Every encounter with the object, every observation, and every interaction among those studying it carried heightened significance. The dark turns that had begun subtly now dominated daily life. Ambition clashed with caution, curiosity collided with fear, and the city's social order was tested at every turn. The object, while remaining physically enigmatic, had revealed a power far greater than mere appearance or craftsmanship. It could manipulate perception, influence behavior, and provoke consequences that extended beyond immediate observation. Amid this turmoil, it became evident that the city had been irrevocably changed. Alexandria's citizens were no longer mere observers. They were participants in a drama shaped by ambition, fear, morality, and the enigmatic influence of the object. The dark turns that had begun with small disagreements, subtle manipulations, and psychological disturbances had escalated into a pervasive state of uncertainty, tension, and moral challenge. The city, its people, and the object itself were now entwined in a story that had moved far beyond curiosity, into the realms of danger, revelation, and inevitable confrontation. The city of Alexandria, once alive with the ordinary rhythms of trade and daily routine, now pulsed with tension, unease, and anticipation. The strange object at the docks had grown from curiosity to obsession, from fascination to fear, and now, inexorably, toward revelation. Each day had layered new observations, conflicts, and psychological disturbances atop the last, creating a complex web of mystery that none could untangle easily. Yet the city seemed to sense that the culmination of these events, the moment when the object would reveal its secret, was approaching. The air itself felt charged, thick with expectation, as though the river, the docks, and even the narrow alleys surrounding them had aligned to bear witness to an awakening far greater than anyone could have imagined. Miriam Voss, whose scholarly diligence had guided much of the investigation, AP, approached the object with a mixture of excitement, dread, and unwavering determination. She had catalogued the patterns, noted the subtle reactions to light, touch, and environmental conditions, and analyzed the faint pulses and vibrations that seemed to emanate from the object itself. Yet despite her meticulous work, she felt a gnawing uncertainty, the sense that understanding alone might not suffice. The object had resisted every attempt at control or categorization, and now it seemed poised to disclose something far beyond the comprehension of mere observation. Miriam, standing at the edge of the docks as the morning sun cast long golden beams across the river, felt an almost magnetic pull, compelling her to step closer, to engage fully with the enigma she had pursued for weeks. Thornwell, observing from a few paces away, was equally drawn, though by different motivations. His mind, always calculating, raced through potential opportunities, potential advantages, and the possibility of power that might be harnessed from understanding the object. For him, revelation was not merely intellectual, it was a resource, a tool, a lever that could shift influence and command within Alexandria. Yet even he, confident and commanding as he usually was, could not predict the object's next movement, its next subtle shift, nor the consequences it might trigger. There was a tension between his ambition and a creeping unease that reminded him, however unwillingly, that the object was not a simple artifact to be dominated. It was an entity, enigmatic, deliberate, and in some ineffable way, aware of those who approached it. Crow, ever grounded in pragmatism, observed the unfolding scene with measured caution. He had seen the city react, seen fear escalate, and seen individuals pushed beyond reason by the object's subtle influence. He had tested, measured, and recorded with precision, yet the revelation that seemed imminent was not something that could be dissected or quantified. It demanded presence, intuition, and an acceptance of uncertainty. Crow felt a low hum of anticipation within himself, a recognition that the events to come would test not only his understanding of the object, but his instincts, judgment, and ability to act when confronted with the inexplicable. Reverend Byrne, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, observed from the shadows, feeling a spiritual weight descend upon the docks. His moral sensibilities and faith had guided his interpretation of events, yet he recognized that revelation would challenge not only intellect and strategy, but the very foundation of belief, morality, and conscience. The object had exposed hidden fears, ambitions, and impulses, and Byrne understood that its final disclosure might confront the city with truths it was unprepared to face. He felt an almost premonitory tremor, a realization that the forthcoming revelation could either unify or fracture Alexandria, and that the consequences would ripple far beyond those present at the docks. The object itself, silent and still, seemed to respond to the collective attention it drew. Its surface shimmered faintly as the morning progressed, catching the sunlight at angles that revealed markings previously invisible, lines and symbols that twisted and shifted like the movements of water. Observers noted patterns aligning in sequences that suggested meaning, though what that meaning entailed remained frustratingly elusive. Miriam, with her keen eye, recognized an interconnection, a deliberate arrangement that indicated purpose rather than randomness. Each marking, each pulse, seemed to resonate with the others, creating a subtle rhythm, a hidden code waiting to be unlocked. Then, as if acknowledging the culmination of observation, patience, and human engagement, the object responded. A low, vibrating hum resonated through the docks, perceptible not only to ears, but to the very bones of those standing nearby. The air shifted subtly, carrying with it a tangible energy that was at once unsettling and magnetic. Observers felt a strange pressure, a draw toward the object, as though it had begun to reveal itself, not through words or forms, but through a presence that demanded attention and comprehension. Miriam, despite every lesson in logic and reason, felt a tremor of fear and anticipation, realizing that the revelation was imminent, and that its nature might surpass every theory she had constructed. Suddenly, the markings, once static and enigmatic, began to shift perceptibly. Lines and symbols rearranged themselves, forming patterns that suggested a narrative, a series of instructions, or a map. Miriam's hand trembled as she recorded every detail, realizing that the object was communicating in a way that transcended conventional language. Thornwell, his usual composure strained, leaned closer, attempting to interpret the patterns, his mind racing with possibilities, strategies, and the potential power they represented. Crow, practical and measured, observed the sequences with caution, noting the alignment of symbols, the pulses, and the subtle vibrations that seemed to correlate with shifts in the environment. Byrne, quietly whispering prayers under his breath, recognized a duality, revelation that was intellectual, yet simultaneously moral, emotional, and spiritual in nature. As the day progressed, it became clear that the object's revelation was multi-layered. Observers noticed that the markings not only conveyed visual patterns, but seemed to respond to emotional states. Those approaching with fear, greed, or ambition saw distortions, while those with curiosity, caution, or integrity perceived clarity. Miriam recognized the implications, The object was not merely a puzzle to be solved, it was a test designed to interact with the very character and intent of those who engaged it. Thornwell's ambition, usually precise and calculated, introduced instability. Crow's pragmatic caution allowed him insight. Burns' moral vigilance offered perspective, and Miriam's intellectual rigor provided structure. The revelation was not simply knowledge, it was a mirror, reflecting the inner truth of those who sought to uncover it. Then came the first tangible disclosure. A small panel previously unobserved slowly slid open on one side of the object. Inside, a series of delicate mechanisms, engraved symbols and intricate patterns were revealed, seemingly designed with extraordinary precision and intention. It was clear that these internal components were not merely decorative, they had purpose, function, and meaning. Miriam's mind raced to interpret the sequences. While Thornwell considered how they could be manipulated, Crow observed patterns that suggested physical principles at play, and Byrne considered the ethical implications of exposure. The internal structure confirmed what had been suspected for days. The object was not passive, nor merely decorative or symbolic. It was interactive, dynamic, and deliberate, a creation that had been conceived to elicit engagement, interpretation, and response from those who approached it. What followed was a series of revelations that layered observation upon moral insight. Symbols on the object corresponded to historical events, cryptic warnings, and accounts of human behavior, spanning distant lands and long past centuries. Miriam's eyes widened as she recognized references to phenomena she had studied in obscure texts, mysterious disappearances, unexplained environmental shifts, and human behaviors amplified by subtle external influences. Thornwell, recognizing opportunity, attempted to correlate the patterns with potential leverage, but the moral and psychological dimensions of the revelation resisted straightforward manipulation. Crow, interpreting sequences with pragmatism, identified cause and effect patterns that had eluded others, providing insight into the object's internal logic. Byrne, in quiet reflection, discerned lessons woven into the sequences, suggesting ethical and spiritual dimensions that demanded attention, humility, and integrity. By late afternoon, the revelation became increasingly undeniable. The object, in its complexity, demonstrated that it was not an inert artifact, but a deliberately designed enigma, capable of interacting with the observer's mind, morals, and intentions. Each interaction revealed more layers, more connections, more consequences. Alexandria's citizens, drawn by rumor and observation, began to understand the gravity of the discovery. Some saw knowledge, others power, some fear, and others moral responsibility. The city, in effect, had become both laboratory and participant, its streets, alleys, and citizens intertwined with the object's purpose. By evening, the full magnitude of the revelation began to coalesce. The object's symbols, its subtle vibrations, its interactions with observers, and the internal mechanisms together conveyed a singular truth. The city, its people, the observer were inseparable from the mystery. The object had been designed not simply to convey information but to test understanding, morality, courage, and character. It challenged perception, forced introspection, and amplified hidden truths. In that moment, Alexandria's docks were no longer merely a location. They had become a crucible, a stage upon which the interplay of human ambition, morality, and curiosity was laid bare in the presence of something greater, something deliberate, and something infinitely enigmatic. The revelation, however, was not complete in a single moment. It unfolded gradually, layer upon layer, demanding attention, reflection, and interaction. Each observer, according to their disposition, perceived different facets. Miriam saw knowledge, patterns, and connections. Thornwell saw leverage and influence, yet recognized limits imposed by the object's moral dimension. Crow saw structure, cause, and effect, insight tempered by caution. Byrne saw the ethical and spiritual imperatives embedded within the enigma. Together, these perceptions formed a composite understanding that revealed the object's full purpose. It was a mirror, a test, and a guide, demanding engagement not merely with facts, but with conscience, intention, and the collective human spirit. As night fell, casting long shadows across the docks, the object pulsed softly, as if acknowledging the comprehension, effort, and character of those who had engaged it. Alexandria, changed irrevocably, had borne witness to revelation, yet the consequences, the choices, and the unfolding story were far from over. The city had glimpsed something beyond ordinary perception, something that would shape its history, its inhabitants, and their understanding of morality, curiosity, and human behavior for generations to come. The revelation was complete in understanding, yet ongoing in consequence, setting the stage for what would follow, the aftermath, the reckoning, and the legacy of this mysterious transformative presence at Alexandria's heart. The revelation had settled over Alexandria like a heavy, unrelenting fog, and though the city appeared outwardly unchanged, the events at the docks had left an indelible mark on its streets, its people, and its collective consciousness. Those who had witnessed the object's disclosure emerged altered, their understanding of reality, morality, and human ambition forever reshaped. The docks, once simply a place of commerce and routine, had become hallowed in a strange sense, a nexus of experience where curiosity, fear, and revelation had intersected. The air carried the weight of reflection, and the city's rhythm slowed as people struggled to reconcile the extraordinary with the ordinary, the unknowable with their own perceptions. Miriam Voss, whose intellect had guided much of the investigation, found herself immersed in a state of profound contemplation. The patterns she had painstakingly recorded, the shifting symbols, and the internal mechanisms of the object lingered in her mind as though alive, demanding attention even outside the presence of the artifact. She walked the streets of Alexandria at dawn, reflecting on the lessons embedded within the object's intricate design. The revelation had been both intellectual and moral, a duality she had not anticipated. The object had demonstrated that understanding alone could not capture its essence. Intention, integrity, and engagement of character were equally essential. Miriam felt a growing responsibility, not merely to record and analyze, but to interpret, to guide, and to ensure that the lessons of the object would not be forgotten or misused. Thornwell, meanwhile, wrestled with the limits of ambition in the face of revelation. His confidence and strategic mind had suggested that understanding the object could grant influence, power, and control, yet the object had subtly exposed the boundaries of such aspirations. Every maneuver, every attempt to manipulate the situation, had been met with resistance, moral or otherwise, from the object's inherent structure. Thornwell's outward composure masked an internal reckoning, a recognition that the revelation had not only challenged his intellect, but tested his character. He began to understand that in the presence of forces beyond ordinary comprehension, human ambition must be tempered by ethical consideration. Though reluctant to admit it, this realization unsettled him more than any practical threat the city could pose. Crow, pragmatic and grounded, returned to his routine with a new sense of vigilance. The revelation had confirmed suspicions he had held from the beginning, that the object's influence was both deliberate and far-reaching, capable of touching mind, body, and emotion. He began to observe interactions in Alexandria with renewed attentiveness, noting subtle shifts in behavior, unspoken tension, and the lingering impact of fear and curiosity. Though practical in approach, he recognized that the aftermath demanded more than observation. Action, caution, and discernment were now intertwined. The city's safety, the integrity of those involved, and the preservation of knowledge required deliberate engagement. Crow had emerged not merely as an observer but as a stabilizing presence in a city whose equilibrium had been disrupted. Reverend Byrne, perhaps more than any other, felt the moral gravity of the aftermath. The revelation had illuminated not just the object's nature, but the hidden inclinations, weaknesses, and strengths of those who engaged it. Byrne's role had evolved from observer and counselor to moral interpreter, tasked with guiding individuals and the broader city through the consequences of their interactions. He preached cautiously, weaving lessons learned from the docks into sermons and counsel, emphasizing humility, vigilance, and the importance of ethical engagement with forces beyond ordinary understanding. His reflections extended beyond Alexa. Indria itself. He recognized that the object, its influence, and the subsequent revelation were a reminder that human society, when confronted with the extraordinary, could be both resilient and fragile, noble and fallible. The city of Alexandria itself bore the aftermath in more subtle ways. Trade continued, markets thrived, and everyday life persisted, yet beneath the surface there was an undeniable change. Citizens spoke in hushed tones about the events at the docks, weaving stories that blended observation, rumor, and personal interpretation. The docks became a quiet focal point, visited by those curious, cautious, or seeking insight into the object's enigmatic influence. People approached with reverence, fear, or skepticism, their behavior shaped not only by the artifact but by the collective memory of those who had witnessed its revelation. Alexandria had internalized the events, creating a cultural imprint that would influence social dynamics, moral reasoning, and human behavior for years to come. The personal consequences for those directly involved were profound. Miriam experienced both exhilaration and trepidation. Her intellect had unlocked new understanding, yet she grappled with the weight of moral responsibility. Thornwell's ambitions were tempered by the subtle reminder that some forces, particularly those testing morality and character, could not be conquered by strategy alone. Crow's pragmatism had evolved into cautious vigilance, an awareness that observation without action could leave the city vulnerable. Burns' faith had been strengthened, yet challenged, by the revelation. He recognized the necessity of moral guidance in the wake of events that transcended ordinary experience. Each individual had been irrevocably altered, their lives intertwined with the object and its lessons, in ways that would shape their decisions, actions, and legacies. Unexpectedly, the aftermath also these subtle reactions to emotional states. These phenomena ensured that the aftermath was not a simple conclusion but a continuous process, a living interaction between the city, its inhabitants, and the object itself. Alexandria had entered a phase of reflection, observation, and cautious engagement, aware that the lessons learned at the docks were ongoing, and that the object's influence was far from fully understood. The broader social implications became increasingly apparent. Citizens who had not directly witnessed the object's revelation absorbed its significance through rumor, observation, and cultural transmission. Local leaders, merchants, and scholars began to incorporate caution, vigilance, and ethical reasoning into decision-making, subtly reshaping Alexandria's social dynamics. Fear, curiosity, and reverence coexisted, creating an environment in which the extraordinary had been normalized and internalized. The city had learned, in effect, that encounters with the extraordinary, whether material, intellectual, or moral, could no longer be treated as isolated events. They demanded attention, reflection, and engagement, shaping not only individual behavior, but the social fabric itself. Even the physical environment of the docks reflected the aftermath. Observers noted subtle changes in the river's currents, the behavior of shadows, and the interplay of light upon the object. These phenomena, though often imperceptible to casual glance, reinforced the enduring presence and influence of the object. Alexandria, its streets and waterways now intertwined with extraordinary events, existed in a delicate balance between the ordinary and the exceptional. Citizens had learned to navigate both, their perceptions sharpened, their caution heightened, and their understanding forever shaped by the revelation. The psychological impact was equally profound. Individuals who had interacted with the far into the future, shaping not only contemporary experiences, but also the development of knowledge, ethics, and practical skills within Alexandria. The darker elements of human behavior, however, were not entirely extinguished. Thornwell's lingering ambition, the subtle manipulations of those seeking advantage, and the latent fear and superstition within the populace ensured that tension, distrust, and moral testing persisted. The aftermath, therefore, was not a neat resolution but a dynamic state, a balance between insight and ambition, knowledge and fear, integrity and manipulation. Alexandria had emerged from revelation transformed, yet the object's influence ensured that vigilance, reflection, and ethical engagement remained essential for the city's stability and moral coherence. Ultimately, the aftermath revealed a duality inherent in both the object and human experience. The city, its inhabitants, and the artifact were intertwined in a narrative that encompassed intellectual discovery, moral testing, and psychological influence. Alexandria had borne witness to extraordinary events that defied ordinary understanding, yet had emerged with new insight, heightened awareness, and the recognition that human engagement with the unknown required courage, integrity, and reflection. The docks, once a stage for trade and routine, had become a crucible of transformation, their legacy embedded not only in observation and documentation but in the lived experience and evolving consciousness of the city itself. By the end of the period following the revelation, Alexandria's streets, institutions, and citizens had adapted to a new reality. Trade resumed, communities functioned with renewed caution, and scholars continued to study and document observations, yet all were marked by the enduring presence of the object and the lessons it had imparted. The aftermath was neither final nor static. It was an ongoing engagement, a continuous dialogue between the extraordinary and the ordinary, between curiosity and caution, ambition and ethics. The city had learned that true understanding required more than observation. It demanded reflection, moral discernment, and recognition of the interconnectedness of human behavior and extraordinary phenomena. In these days, weeks, and months, Alexandria existed in a state of heightened awareness, its citizens subtly transformed by their exposure to the object, its revelations, and the consequences that followed. The aftermath, profound and multifaceted, was a testament to the enduring impact of curiosity, ambition, morality, and human engagement with mystery. The city, forever changed, would carry the lessons learned at the docks into its future, integrating insight, vigilance, and ethical reflection into the rhythm of daily life, ensuring that the extraordinary experience remained both a cautionary tale and a source of enduring wisdom. Years passed, yet Alexandria never truly forgot the events at the docks. The objet, CT, now studied, revered, and cautiously respected, had become a permanent part of the city's identity, its presence subtly shaping the collective memory and culture. Though the revelation had occurred weeks or months prior, its lessons continued to resonate. Citizens spoke of it in hushed tones, scholars documented its influence, and children grew up hearing stories of the docks as a place where curiosity, morality, and the unknown had collided in ways that forever altered human understanding. The city had learned that extraordinary experiences leave marks far deeper than the physical. They carve impressions into the consciousness of a community, shaping decisions, behavior, and perception across generations. Miriam Voss, now regarded as one of Alexandria's foremost scholars, spent her years interpreting and preserving the knowledge gleaned from the object. Her meticulous records, previously confined to the docks in her study, became manuscripts of extraordinary value, offering insight not only into the patterns, mechanisms, and symbols of the artifact, but also into its moral and psychological dimensions. Miriam's work emphasized a holistic approach, intellectual rigor combined with ethical awareness, observation tempered by empathy, and the recognition that the unknown cannot be fully understood without consideration of its effects on those who engage it. Scholars from neighboring cities began to correspond with her, eager to learn of the phenomena that had transformed Alexandria, and her writings gradually spread the understanding that extraordinary objects are not merely puzzles, but mirrors of human character and society. Thornwell, once a figure driven by ambition and strategy, had evolved in ways even he could not have foreseen. The revelation and its aftermath had imposed limitations upon his pursuit of power, exposing the consequences of unchecked ambition when confronted with forces beyond human comprehension. Though he remained influential within Alexandria, his methods became tempered by caution, reflection, and ethical consideration. Thornwell began mentoring younger merchants, politicians, and scholars, emphasizing the importance of integrity, awareness of human limitations, and humility before extraordinary phenomena. His transformation became a living testament to the city. Even the most calculating individuals are not immune to moral lessons when engaged with forces that reveal the truth of character. Crow's pragmatic influence also endured. He became a central figure in documenting the object's ongoing behavior and the city's responses, blending careful observation with cautious action. His contributions ensured that Alexandria maintained equilibrium, avoiding the mistakes of impulsivity or unbridled curiosity. Crow established protocols for engagement with unusual artifacts, emphasizing safety, awareness, and ethical responsibility. His practical wisdom complemented Miriam's intellectual insights and Thornwell's tempered ambition, creating a framework by which Alexandria could navigate future encounters with the extraordinary. Through these measures, Crow ensured that the city's understanding was preserved, refined, and prepared for generations to come. Reverend Byrne, whose role had been primarily moral and spiritual, emerged as a guiding force for the ethical integration of the revelation into everyday life. He delivered sermons that balanced humility, courage, and reflection, reminding citizens that extraordinary experiences are not only intellectual, but deeply moral, capable of shaping behavior, priorities, and choices. Byrne's teachings emphasized accountability. The object had revealed hidden inclinations, fears, and ambitions, and it remained the responsibility of individuals and the community to act with integrity and awareness. His influence extended into education, civic guidance, and spiritual mentorship, ensuring that the lessons of the docks were not merely historical, but actively integrated into the city's ethical framework. The legacy of the object also manifested in Alexandria's culture and folklore. Songs, poems, and plays began to reference the events at the docks, sometimes exaggerating, sometimes mythologizing, yet always retaining the essence of transformation, revelation, and moral testing. Markets and social gatherings became venues not only for trade and commerce, but for discussion and reflection, where citizens debated the implications of human ambition, curiosity, and ethical responsibility. The docks themselves became a place of pilgrimage for those who sought understanding, insight, or connection to the extraordinary. Alexandria had internalized the experience, transforming it from a moment of anomaly into a foundation of civic identity, cultural memory, and philosophical contemplation. Yet even as the legacy solidified, questions persisted. Despite Miriam's meticulous records, Crow's practical documentation, Thornwell's strategic observations, and Burns' moral reflections, the object retained an air of inscrutability. Scholars, citizens, and visitors alike continued to debate its origin, purpose, and ultimate significance. Some speculated that it had been created by a lost civilization, designed as a test of character and intellect. Others suggested supernatural origins, claiming the object was a conduit for forces beyond human comprehension. Rumors circulated that it had appeared in other cities, leaving similar impressions and transformations. Each theory, while compelling, failed to fully capture the layered complexity of the object, leaving Alexandria with a permanent tension between understanding and uncertainty. The city also grappled with more personal questions. How had individuals changed when confronted by forces beyond ordinary perception? What did ambition, fear, or curiosity reveal about character? How could future generations learn from the experiences without repeating mistakes? Citizens reflected upon their own AC. Jones during the revelation and aftermath, often in private moments, recognizing that their behavior had been influenced, tested, and shaped by something far greater than themselves. These reflections ensured that the legacy was not only historical but deeply personal, embedded in conscience, decision-making, and ethical awareness. Miriam, pondering the enduring mystery, realized that the object's greatest revelation was not its mechanism, symbols, or patterns, but the reflection of human nature it provoked. It had illuminated tendencies, weaknesses, and strengths within those who observed it, creating insight that transcended ordinary scholarship. She documented her ongoing thoughts, emphasizing that understanding extraordinary phenomena requires humility. Knowledge alone is insufficient without engagement with intention, morality, and reflection. Her writings became foundational texts, inspiring scholars to approach discovery not merely as accumulation of facts, but as a holistic process, blending intellect, ethics, and psychological insight. Thornwell, despite his tempered ambition, continued to ask questions, driven by curiosity and a lingering desire for mastery over understanding. He acknowledged that the object had limitations on human influence, but he remained intrigued by its mechanisms, aware that future insight might still reveal additional layers. His reflections, though practical, were imbued with newfound respect for moral constraints, and he became a cautionary figure, a reminder that ambition, unchecked by ethics, could falter in the face of extraordinary truth. Crow's practical reflections were grounded in observation and consequence. He catalogued ongoing minor shifts in the object's behavior, subtle reactions to environmental conditions, and variations in human response over time. These records demonstrated that the object's influence persisted, albeit in nuanced ways, creating a living framework of understanding for the city. Crow emphasized that vigilance, careful observation, and ethical consideration were essential, ensuring that Alexandria remained aware of the delicate balance between curiosity and responsibility. Reverend Burns' legacy continued through moral and spiritual education. He emphasized the duality of revelation. Extraordinary experiences reveal both knowledge and character. His teachings reminded citizens that insight is inseparable from moral consequence, and that the human response to mystery is as significant as the mystery itself. Burns' guidance ensured that Alexandria integrated the lessons of the docks into daily life, reinforcing the notion that awareness, humility, and integrity are essential in engaging with forces that transcend ordinary perception. The object itself, while stable and preserved, remained a source of ongoing fascination. Its markings, vibrations, and subtle responsiveness were continually studied, yet each discovery prompted new questions, rather than final answers. Scholars debated the purpose of its design, the origin of its mechanisms, and the implications of its moral and psychological influence. Visitors traveled from distant cities to witness it, each bringing fresh perspective, observation, and inquiry. The object's legacy was thus both physical and conceptual. It shaped Alexandria materially, socially, and intellectually, while perpetually inviting reflection, investigation, and moral engagement. Despite centuries of documentation, observation, and philosophical discourse, fundamental questions endured: who had created the object and why? What forces, if any, guided its design? Was it unique to Alexandria, or one instance among many? Could its influence extend beyond human perception, shaping not only behavior but fate? These questions, unanswered yet persistent, ensured that Alexandria remained a city of contemplation, inquiry, and humility. The legacy of the docks was not only historical but eternal, a reminder that extraordinary experiences challenge understanding, reveal character, and invite reflection. Ultimately, the legacy and questions were inseparable. Alexandria had emerged from the extraordinary events transformed, intellectually enriched, morally challenged, socially nuanced, and psychologically aware. Citizens had learned that knowledge, ambition, and curiosity are inseparable from ethical engagement, that observation alone is insufficient without reflection, and that extraordinary experiences demand vigilance, courage, and integrity. The object remained, a silent and enigmatic witness, its presence a continual prompt for inquiry, reflection, and moral consideration. Alexandria's identity, shaped by encounter with the unknown, was forever intertwined with the lessons it had learned, the questions it had asked, and the ongoing dialogue between human aspiration and extraordinary mystery. Generations would come and go, yet the docks remained, the object remained, and the lessons endured. The city had learned that extraordinary phenomena are mirrors, revealing not only their own nature, but the nature of those who engage them. Alexandria had been transformed, its citizens challenged and enriched, its social and moral fabric reshaped. The legacy of revelation and the enduring questions ensured that curiosity would coexist with caution, ambition with integrity, and knowledge with ethical awareness. The city, forever changed, became a living testament to the interplay of mystery, human character, and the profound consequences of engaging with forces that defy ordinary understanding. And though centuries may pass, the questions linger. How much do we truly understand of the forces we encounter? Are we changed more by what we discover, or by how we respond? Alexandria's story, marked by revelation, aftermath, and legacy, reminds us that the unknown is never passive, and the choices we make in response echo far beyond our own perception, leaving a permanent imprint upon the world, history, and the human.